Legal professionals of Reddit, what's the funniest way you've ever seen a lawyer or defendant blow a court case? I once attended oral arguments for US Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. It's pretty much the big time. I watched a lawyer argue that his client received what's known as ineffective assistance of counsel at the trial from which he was appealing. The attorney, however, was not doing a very good job during oral arguments. So, at one point one of the judges on the panel leans forward and asks him, "Counselor, are you currently providing ineffective assistance of counsel?" Imagine getting that kind of burn from a judge in Second Circuit appeals. Do you just turn in your law degree and become a homesteader? Lawyer was verbally running through the evidence against the guy he was defending, trying to claim there wasn't enough to even call a trial. All totally fine. Except he said, "I believe a more seasoned judge wouldn't have let this trial move forward." Not knowing that the judge he's speaking to gave the okay to move the trial to this court. He was immediately given a hard motion denied. Personally insulting the judge. It's a bold move. Cotton. Let's see if it pays off. My brother was on a jury back in the days of MySpace. A woman had been hit by a big rig during foggy weather. She was suing for a back injury. The last day of the trial they ask her if she has a MySpace account and brought up her site for the jury to see. I think all profiles were open then. There's a picture of her dancing on the hood of a car and right next to it is a text exchange of her saying that she shouldn't go out too much because her lawyer says that she has to look injured. Needless to say, she lost that case. A short one. The judge recused himself from a criminal case, publicly stating that he knew the defendant and he was a son of a bitch and guilty as hell. A funny historical one here. Marshal Ney is on trial for treason after Napoleon gets overthrown for the second time. His lawyer desperately tries to save the marshal's life with an unusual take on things. Due to a border change, Marshal Ney's hometown was, at the time of the trial, in Prussia. Therefore, argued the lawyer, Marshal Ney was not technically French and accordingly could not be guilty of treason. Marshal Ney disagreed and shouted out to the court, "I am French and I will remain French." Full stop. He was subsequently found guilty and sentenced to death. This also has a double whammy with badass last words. He asked for and was given permission to lead his own firing squad. His last words to them were, "Soldiers, when I give the command to fire, fire straight at my heart. Wait for the order. It will be my last to you. I protest against my condemnation. I have fought 100 battles for France, and not one against her. Soldiers, fire." Talk about a way to die. Not my case, but still a personal favorite. I was sitting in court waiting for my turn. Case going was a littering case. Officer said he saw the defendant throw the clear wrapper on a pack of gum out of his window. Guy decided to defend himself. Girlfriend takes the stand. Officer has already testified. Guy asks, "Did I throw a gum wrapper out the window?" She replies, "No, you did not," with this huge grin on her face. The defendant is now also grinning and goes, "What did I throw out the window?" To which she replies, "It was the plastic wrapper from your cigarettes." Guy rests his case right there. Literally thought he would get off because the officer couldn't properly identify the clear plastic that he admits to throwing out the window. I had a case where a lawyer who apparently had expertise in areas other than litigation decided to litigate a case for one of his clients. He asks to depose my guy. No problem. I meet with my guy and get him all prepared for testimony. We sit down at the deposition. He's sworn in and we're ready to go. First question isn't, "Would you please state your name?" or anything like that. First question was something like, "Isn't it the truth in this case that on the 6th of April, 2004 you," and then a conclusory statement about his whole claim. I objected. My guy says no. Other lawyer shuffled his papers and after a lengthy pause asks the second question. "You sure? Are you guilty?" I represent school districts. One of my clients has a farm that is used to teach agricultural science to the students. The manager of the farm decides to brutally euthanize a ton of chickens in full view of a group of elementary school students. Sometimes, Farms have to euthanize chickens. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that he was whacking the chickens over the head with a hammer. And he had to whack each chicken like 5-6 times before they died because he is apparently some kind of psychopath. The poor chickens were not dying. That didn't deter him. If one refused to die, he'd just toss the chicken on the ground and try again with another one. But the birds were all getting horrifically damaged. So they were flapping in circles on the ground. Or walking with terrible, stuttering limps. Or screaming. One of the kids recorded it and Jesus Christ, it was awful to watch. So, I recommended the school district fire him immediately because holy hell. He sued for gender discrimination. My father is an attorney and he always had a story for us when we'd ask him this question. He tells it way better than I do, but I'll give it a shot. Some dude was allegedly smashing a wall with a sledgehammer with others in order to break into a private property. The cops rolled up. And he's the only one to get caught. Fast forward a few months. This guy's in court. Apparently a cop says something about how the defendant was the only one caught. But there were 2 other men who fled on foot and couldn't be apprehended. My father's client's face lights up in an aha moment and immediately tells the judge, "Not true. There were 4 of us. Full stop." I guess he thought if he could disprove someone at the said he'd be let go. Safe to say he was found guilty of vandalism. My father says the judge just kind of sighed and told my father it would be a good idea to keep his client quiet. I was the respondent, not the lawyer, in a civil case where the county accused me of violating a rule that a house cannot have more than 2 parties in a month. The county's prime witness admitted on the stand that 1. The rule was implemented specifically in response to a complaint against me. 2. The rule was not written in the county code. 3. The rule was not included in my warning letter nor in my citation. 4. The county had no expectation of ever applying this rule to any other resident in the future. The judge declared the rule null and void. Not an exact fit for the answer. But I once worked at a company where we found out that a lawyer was trying to arrange a class action suit against us. Before it got off the ground. We found out because this lawyer attempted to email her client. But accidentally emailed us instead. With all the details of the class action. I observed a case where the plaintiff attorney played Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror as his closing argument to evoke an emotional response in the jury. He lost. I'm an attorney and I heard about a hearing where there were several criminal defendants before the judge. The judge noticed a strong pot smell in the courtroom and asked if any of the defendants had pot on them. No one came forward and the judge proceeded. But the odor became stronger and stronger. Finally the judge demanded the perpetrator to come forward. Finally one of them came forward and had several bags of weed on him. A defense lawyer was delivering her closing statement to the jury. In her final sentence, she said, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I urge you to find my client guilty." There was a moment of silence and she then says, "Not guilty. I meant to say not guilty." After argument from the assistant district attorney, the judge asked defense counsel why he should allow the defendant to remain on his own recognizance. Defense counsel looks up, obviously searching for any reason he can because he knows his client is a dirtbag, and this is what he comes up with. Because his girlfriend lives in the apartment above mine and I'll hear her crying all night. Defendant remanded to jail. I worked as a paralegal in a firm specializing in land use litigation and real estate. Another paralegal's husband got a DWI and as a favor to her, one of the partners offered to defend her husband in court. This is a small town with a landmark windmill in the center of town. Well, this paralegal's husband's, who we all called the missing link, DWI stemmed from him crashing his car into the windmill. Front page of the local paper. Reporters at the arraignment. The whole 9 yards. So the law firm partner tells the missing link that when the judge asks him how many beers he had before his accident, he should tell her he had 3. He proceeds to stand in front of the judge and tell her he had 3 cases. The whole room started laughing and he ended up getting jail time. When I was clerking for a judge, a defendant wrote to the judge trying to explain that the 2 bongs found on the floorboard of the car were actually his girlfriend's, but he was afraid to speak up earlier because she's on Section 8. And drugs are forbidden for Section 8 recipients. Mind you, he was on probation at the time the cops pulled him over and it didn't matter who owned the bongs. He was still in violation of his probation for being in possession of drug paraphernalia. His attempt to get out from his charges not only screwed over his girlfriend, but it also showed that he knew of the bongs that were in her car. Landlord didn't want to sue for eviction under her name because she was collecting rent and cash and not declaring it, while her building was in foreclosure. So she had her accountant, who apparently thought there is such thing as client-accountant privilege, and that kind of thing, sue the tenants in his name. So this random accountant shows up at eviction court with the tenants. His name isn't attached to the building or the leases in any way, but he swears he can get the landlord on the phone to vouch that he's authorized to do this in her name. Judge dismissed the case with no prejudice. You can't borrow someone else's name to sue someone if you're trying to do illegal things under your own name, or at all. Not a defendant, but there was this dude in the court I interned as who went in with his friend but wore a shirt with the exact color as the ones in group trials. The bailiff mistook him for a convict and was asking him to sit down. Hell no, man. I'm just here to see my friend. I ain't got no case. He was the one who got caught. I got away. No, he didn't get away. I have a bunch, but my favorite is a group of LLC members who refuse to hire a lawyer for the company as required by the local rules. They keep getting their filings stricken. It's to the point where the judge doesn't even set a hearing anymore. They file whatever they file. They move to strike, and the court enters an order striking it. I am a lawyer now, but this was when I was in law school, and we had to go watch actual court cases in the local district court. A guy is accused of destroying some stuff his neighbor owns. After a complicated plea by his lawyer about how some evidence is inadmissible, and therefore it cannot be proven the defendant is guilty, the judge delivers the verdict, agrees with the lawyers, and acquits him. The defendant gets up, walks towards the judge, as if to shake his hand, and says, "Thank you, Your Honor. I'll never do it again." The prosecutor then quasi-jokingly says, "Appeal." Full stop. In courtroom where all they do is restraining orders. Everyone gets there at one time in the morning and sits in the chairs and judge calls the cases one by one. Dude purposely sits next to girl getting the restraining order against him and starts trying to hold her hand and shti. She yells and asks for help and bro had to wait outside. When it was his turn, the judge was so mad he almost sent him to jail. I wasn't the lawyer, but a paid expert witness, as our lawyer questioned the federal employee environmental law case. Our client jumped up from the table and screamed in his broken English that a CNT Sheriff King lies like a WHRE. Fines were paid, but we did win the case. I was working for a barrister who turned up to a hearing and discovered that opposing counsel had secretly contacted the judge's chambers with a whole bunch of information about the case. That's a horrendous breach of professional ethics. So one of the very basic rules of litigation is that you file stuff with both the judge and the other side, except in very special circumstances. My barrister just kind of shrugged his shoulders at the judge when asked if he knew about the information. The judge spent the rest of the hearing tearing the opposition apart. They lost an absolutely unlosable case. I was working as court staff in a hearing where a guy was accused of robbing a grocery store. The defendant's lawyer was arguing that they could not identify the man in the surveillance camera footage as his client. While the footage was being shown to the court, the defendant leaned over and said loud enough to his lawyer, "Do you think they can tell that's me in the video?" So a lawyer scheduled a preliminary trial on a non-criminal court day. These days were reserved for family, traffic, etc. The lawyer insisted by not doing so, it was a violation of his client's right to a speedy trial. He was in custody at jail and needed to be transported about 2 hours out of town for this court case. The judge knew the lawyer would be late. He was always late. So, when the inmate arrived to court on the scheduled non-criminal court day, the lawyer was, you guessed it, late. Once the defendant was in processed to the courtroom, the judge immediately told the clerks to not call the lawyer's office, and he started looking at his watch. After about 10 minutes, the judge called it and we out-processed the prisoner to the transport vehicle. By the time the prisoner was moving off the property, the lawyer pulled into the parking lot. There was a closed-door session between the judge and lawyer. To be a fly on the wall for that convo. Sovereign citizens always make for a good time. There was the guy getting a divorce from his wife of 25 years. His entire argument for why he shouldn't pay alimony to his wife who stayed home taking care of their 8 kids, 3 of whom were still at home, is that since his wife would no longer do her marital duties it wasn't a marriage. She wouldn't sleep with him because he was against trying to prevent more kids happening at all. Then reference the Bible on top of it. The judge's face was priceless. Defendant was willing to stay on probation conditioned on jail until a bed became available. Due to the circumstances of the defendant's age and minor violations, the judge was very open to the possibility. So this was argued out. In rebuttal to the defense lawyer's argument, the prosecutor said something the defendant didn't like. The defendant stood up, called us all racists and said, "Send my f-king ass to prison." You know that scene where Jerry Maguire pleads with Rod to help me help you? It was 100x worse. I was an expert engineer witness at a deposition defending a contractor who happened to be an engineer himself. Plaintiff claimed he was liable as an engineer as well as the contractor. Defense was he was the contractor, but that doesn't mean he was the engineer for the project just because he was one. After 6 hours of headache-inducing questioning, plaintiff's lawyer pulls out a letter from and certified by the contractor that simply stated, "I am the engineer for the project." He sits back and basically has that look of, "Let's see what you got to say now, for." Defendant is apprehended for warrants and asks judge for bail. Tells judge he moved and was not served with the warrants. Some question as to his identity. Judge asks defendant where he was born. Def says Puerto Rico. Defendant totally looks mestizo. Not Puerto Rican at all. Judge asks where in Puerto Rico? Defendant says San Juan. Judge asks defendant, when were you last in San Juan? Defendant says a couple of years ago. Judge asks defendant, how did you get there? Defendant replies, I went on the Amtrak. Judge would not grant bail. When you flunk geography, it's for a long time. So this wasn't the defendant but a plaintiff. I was on a jury for a civil trial. There were 2 co-plaintiffs suing one defendant. The first co-plaintiff was being represented by his father, who was an older guy and didn't seem to have much experience in court. For the first week of the trial, seemingly every other question was being objected to. Usually because his questions weren't questions or he was trying to elicit testimony that was hearsay. He basically pissed everyone off and presented a terrible case. The second co-plaintiff then gets on the stand and it was clear that he was there very reluctantly. It gets to the defendant's lawyer turn, cross-examination, and the co-plaintiff blurts out that the only reason why he's there is because of a fiduciary duty to the other plaintiff. Then he gets asked if he feels the defendant owes him any money. And he just says no. It was 6 weeks of this stupid trial. It wasn't every day and there was no trial during the week for Thanksgiving. But it was excruciating, and the jury ended up awarding no money to anyone. What a colossal waste of time. It happened to a friend. He hired a lawyer to sue his university for charging a fee that he wasn't supposed to pay. He discovered, at the very hearing, that his lawyer sued the wrong university. Lawyer here. When I had been licensed less than a year, I was representing a guy in a custody case. He was adamant that his ex was on drugs, so I requested drug testing. The judge said both parties had to be tested, which I had warned my client would likely be the judge's request. Mom tested clean. My guy tested positive for drugs. We did not win the case. Same guy also fell asleep during the hearing. The accused was being sentenced after a common suggestion by both the Crown and defense attorneys. And it came to calculating the total amount of days to be purged according to each infraction. The defense attorney started arguing that the Crown had her numbers wrong and that the sentence was supposed to be 75 days longer than what was about to be agreed upon. The accused's jaw just dropped in disbelief.